A knee-buckling start to the National Signing Day early signing period for Ohio State. These are Snap Judgments. They are brought to you by Buyers Auto. It's Jeremy Birmingham, not on his phone. That's Bill Landis. And I'm Austin Warden. We're off to a flying start on Snap Judgments. Ohio State, a mostly good to very good day for the Buckeyes, Berm. Where do you put it in that scale?
I mean, you had three things that you were worried about coming into the day. You hit 67% of those things. The one thing that didn't go your way, Jeremiah McClellan flipping to Oregon, signing with Oregon, like on the hierarchy of what was the most important, that would have been third on the list. And so, like, you signed, or not yet. Here we sit at 152. Jeremiah Smith's letter of intent is not in yet. Why? I don't know. I guess fax machines work differently in South Florida. Who knows? You can just You can just take a picture of it with your phone and send it. So
can you? I wondered that.
Yeah. And then Ezra Houston is in, and so that's pretty big. You get the number one player in the country. You get a five-star defensive end who you have put a lot of time and resources into over the last couple of years out of one of the powerhouse programs in the Atlanta area at Buford. So there's like the extended value of that. And everyone else signed without incident. And, you know, it's funny, you have 21 kids coming into the day that you're counting on. 18 of them are signed immediately, and, like, that should be something to be positive about. But yet, you know, everyone here waits on pins and needles to hear the final answers from Jeremiah Smith and Ezra Houston. And we started Ryan Day's press conference at, like, 12:10, and Jeremiah Smith was sitting in his gymnasium at Chaminade Madonna High School.
Say it again?
Chaminade Madonna High School. Chaminade, waiting for his opportunity to go and announce his decision. And so, like, you could see the face of Ryan Day when he walked in. Like, it looked sullen.
It was, there was none of the rosy-cheeked hue of
there was
Ryan
a
Day.
rosy hue.
No, he was pale. He was pretty pale from where I was sitting in the front, but maybe I had a bad vantage point.
You know, it's cool for us. I mean, we don't, even those of us who have been around recruiting and in it for a long time, you don't often get to see, like, that moment when it happens. So kind of cool to
Thank God it was in person.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been really grainy on a Zoom call. I would have felt...
Wouldn't have seen his knees buckle. Wouldn't have seen him grab the podium. Like, those are pretty cool moments.
I would have felt bad for his wife and children if he was in New Hampshire, like, with them today. I mean, I know he wants to see him, but I imagine, like, he would have been pretty much a bear to be around all morning, right? Like, it wouldn't have been fun. Hey, Dad, you want to go build a snowman? No, I can't. Got to watch TV. You know, like, so I guess, you know, it's good we get
I got to watch TV.
I got to watch the TV to see what the teens are doing. You know, like, it's cool we got to see that in person. So finishes being a pretty good day for Ohio State, and there's still questions people are going to have, and I tried to get, like, where do you go from here? Because he said we didn't get the whole wish list, but, like, then what's on the wish list? Well, the answer is the wish list will change depending on the other lists.
We'll get to that stuff with current roster, NFL decisions, coaching staff. We'll get into all that on the podcast daily for Thursday. Want to keep the focus on recruiting and the guys that are in the class for Ohio State today on Snap Judgments as much as we can. But all these things are interconnected, so you know that. Outside of, I guess now, Byrne probably needing to add another wide receiver.
Which I don't think they do, really.
You could do that through the portal if you want to, or not at all.
I mean, again, that depends on if Emeka Ibuka returns and you have Jaden Ballard returning, you have Kojo Antwi and Keon Gray's returning, you have the 4 wideouts in the class of 2023 all coming back, you have the 2 that you signed, 2 5-stars in 2024. You don't need it. The loss of Jeremiah McClellan is
plus Damarian Witten.
Plus Damarian Witten, who, I mean, I was told on Tuesday night when the conversation about Jeremiah McClellan flipping to Oregon really began to solidify, that Ohio State believes that there's a chance that Damarian Witten not only starts his career playing in, like, a big slot tight end wide receiver role, but because he doesn't really have the frame to add those 40 pounds that you think a tight end needs to, that he may end up staying there. And I'm going to tell you what, like, Damarian Witten gets overlooked because he's at Glenville and he was sort of positionless. Like, Ohio State thinks this kid is a superstar in the making. So it might be one of those unanswered prayers where you're like, oh, it's a blessing in disguise, because there are few guys in this class. I mean, obviously we can talk about Jeremiah Smith and the generational label that gets attached, but there are a few guys who I've heard more coaches glow about than Damarian Witten.
Bill, what'd you make of the class at this point?
Yeah, I think it's good. When Ryan Day walked in, as Berm said, when Ryan Day walked in, as we're all, like, staring at our phones waiting for Jeremiah Smith to make his announcement known, I was like, oh boy, this is not going to go well, because we had already thought at that point too that Edric Houston was trending, toward Alabama. We're not expecting good news on Amaris Williams, who did flip from Florida to Auburn. It was like, they got their 18, but are they going to like miss on the 3 that we've been waiting for? And obviously it turned out not to be the case. So I think it went from a potential disaster to a very good day for Ohio State, like a day worth celebrating when you hold on to the best player in the country, when you hold on to one of the best defensive linemen in the country, when you're competitive, I think, on the NIL front, which is what people want to see from Ohio State, is they're trying to piece together their roster. And I think they were in both of those cases with Jeremiah Smith and Edric Houston to make sure they secured those. I think it's great. There's still work to be done, like Berm said, but when I think you take the class in total, they did address a lot of needs with this group. And I think there's a lot of players to be really excited about, but starting with the 2 guys at the top that they kept today.
Yeah, you kept your 2 best players. And this is a results-oriented business. People are going to see the recent losses of Jordan Lyle to Miami and the Jeremiah McClellan flip and the Justin Scott. But, like, all of those parts are pretty interchangeable. And I know you look at a 5-star defensive tackle like Justin Scott and say, well, how do you interchange that guy? Well, you get a 4th year from Tyleik Williams, and that is better.
Gives you a little runway to make up for it. Yeah.
Now, the question, obviously, for Ohio State, and we'll talk about it on Thursday, is like, is all that going to happen? And if that doesn't happen, but that's why Ohio State's already had Derek Harmon, the Michigan State transfer, in here, because you have to be somewhat proactive. But the group in general, you get another 5-star quarterback in Aaron Noland, who doesn't get talked about enough, probably because I don't know why. He played in super high level of competition in Georgia, a big time winner. Like, he's a CJ Stroud type of quarterback, the ball placement guy.
He's got some BPS.
More athletic than you think, because he doesn't play in an offense that asks him to run a lot. But when he does, you can see he's got some natural like movement skills. And I was talking about it with Bo Bishop on 97.1 The Fan on the way in today. The difference between CJ coming out of high school was he was rising up and people didn't really know what he was, but like Ohio State had a pretty good idea. Air's a known commodity, but he's also coming into a situation where there isn't a Justin Fields there to guarantee. So, like, I'm not saying that Aaron Noland is going to be Ohio State starting quarterback, but I think it is folly to just remove the possibility.
The door is as open as it has ever been. Yeah.
Ryan Day did try and pump the brakes just on that point a little bit, that he's still going to be a true freshman. He's still not taking a snap here. And I'm not trying to throw any wet blankets on anybody, thinking that could be a possibility. But the first guy at the head of that line is Devin Brown right now, who, again, we can talk about all that on Thursday. But he did say there's going to be a lot to learn, and you can only take so much projection from high school, and there's a ton of it, a lot of production, a lot of time that they've spent evaluating him, and maybe part of this Berm with
against high level
competition, that it's still hard for anybody to go and do that right away. It was hard for CJ, it was hard for Justin Fields, it was hard for Dwayne Haskins, it was hard for Joe Burrow. It's hard for any true freshman quarterback to make that. That's not to try and diminish anything on National Signing Day or take any shine away from Aaron Noland, but some of that conversation about the quarterback specifically is probably tied into what Ryan Day has in the rest of that room, that he's not going to stand up there and say, well, here comes Air. Yeah. This is the huge deal. We got the best one in the country coming in. But the other part maybe where he doesn't get that attention is because of the spotlight on the other guys, and because he did, after the Dylan Raiola decommitment, there was like no doubt. Ohio State seemed to shift all the chips directly to Aaron Noland. They got the commitment, and there was you tell me, I don't think there was a single point where you seemed to express any concern that Aaron Noland was wavering, that he wasn't going to be committed to Ryan Day in Ohio State. And once you shut down any of the outside intrigue, well, then people move on to the other stuff.
Well, he's a smart kid, and playing quarterback for Ryan Day in Ohio State has been a lottery ticket the last few years. And somebody else had the lottery ticket and dropped it on the ground, and he's like, oh, cool, I'll pick it up. And why? You're not going to drop it at that point. And I think that we didn't really get into a lot of the minutia of the class dynamic today because of all the other questions that are being asked. But Aaron Noland was as integral in the signing of Jeremiah Smith, or the eventual signing of Jeremiah Smith, if that happens by the time this is online, as anyone else in this class. Like the bond that those two had, Jeremiah Smith wanted to play with Aaron Noland and wanted him as his quarterback. And if you look at the debate that Jeremiah Smith had to have in the last few days between Miami and Florida State and Ohio State, the quarterback situation is probably one of the deciding factors, other than Brian Hartline, where you look at it and go, I'm more comfortable in that room than I am. Who's Miami's quarterback? I don't know. Like that's
I actually don't know.
right. Like they don't have.
I know who's
Cam
not,
Ward,
I know
maybe?
who's not there.
Yeah.
Right, so you go into that, and that's a big part of this puzzle. And recruiting isn't what it used to be. You don't have the guys building like a super tight knit class because NIL has made people competitors almost in certain ways, and everyone's too cool to talk to each other and that sort of stuff now. But like those few relationships, those few bonds that were formed, the Bryce West and Aaron Scott, the Aaron Noland and Jeremiah Smith, like those things carry a big weight. The Ian Moore with the Armstrong twins, and then those guys going after Gabe Van Sickle, like that's a big difference. We didn't talk about the class dynamic today, and I wish we would have a little bit more, because I think the Armstrong twins, who get overlooked because they're from Ohio and maybe they're not 5-star tackles and guards, but like those guys were hugely important in this class, and it's going to be a top 5 class in a world where people sit back and go, oh damn it, this class stinks, and like it's not. It's a top 4 class.
Number like 3 right now, isn't it?
So and it's going to finish that way. So like that, it's pretty good. Last year's class finished in the top, is number 5 in the country, and a lot of the same objections because you look at individual things like, did we get enough defensive linemen? The answer to that is clearly no. Now, what's interesting is that there's some scuttlebutt today about Ohio State and Dominic Kirks from Villa Angelo St. Joe's up in Cleveland. Washington commit who has not signed yet, that maybe Ohio State is getting involved and asking him to delay a little bit, let them reevaluate where they're at. Maybe he signs tomorrow or Friday. Maybe he waits until the February period. But there's at least an acknowledgement, despite what was said at the podium, like, oh, we're fine, we're okay. Like the actions speak clearly different because they were still chasing Amaris Williams today. Now you have the Dominic Kirks conversation. So there's at least like an acknowledgement that there's parts that need filled.
So I tried to ask about that, and I guess before I ask you this question, I want to say, like, great job keeping Edric Houston. Like, they only have 2, but the 2 they have I think are pretty good, and Edric Houston is one of the best in the country. So like I want to give credit where it's due for that. Why don't they recruit guys like Kirks? And the way that I posed it to Ryan Day was you recruit a lot of, and developmental is probably the wrong word, but I think people know what I mean when I say that, offensive linemen in the Midwest and in Ohio, and they just don't really do that for defensive linemen. And I don't know why that's the case. What do you have a theory on that?
The theory is that there are traits that you look for in these guys. And offensive linemen, those traits are different. Those traits are, he's big, he can move, he doesn't need to be explosive, he doesn't need to be long. You want those things certainly in an offensive lineman. You want a guy who's got an 84-inch wingspan at tackle, but you can work around it if it's not there. You can look at a guy like Luke Montgomery and go, he's athletic enough to be able to put here. If you are looking at a 6'5", 230-pound defensive end like Dominic Kirks, who seems to lack a little bit of explosion, that you're playing in the bad part of Cleveland football, right?
Yeah.
If you're not dominating on your tape and you have injury issues, then you're like, I don't know. Like, especially when you combine that with the fact that there's no explosive trait. There's no, 4.4 speed. There's no Zach Harrison athleticism. There's no Jack Sawyer size. There's no JT Tumalo out get off. Like, you're missing some of those parts. But to your point, you still have to fill the roster, and that is the question I think people should have. But if you look at the rest of the recruiting class, Brian Hartline's room, Tim Walton's room, it's not like there were a lot of backup options for those guys either. This is Ohio State. They think they're going to sign the players they recruit, and they don't waste a lot of time and energy just building relationships with guys that they're not interested in. And they believe, I think, ultimately, hey, we're going to get to signing day and we're going to win. And then if you don't, you're better off finding a third-year college defensive end in the transfer portal. Let's do a hypothetical while we're here. I was asked about it on the live chat at Ryan Day's press conference. Would Ohio State go after Corey Foreman from USC, right? Corey Foreman was the number 1 ranked defensive lineman in the country coming out of high school in the class of 2021, ahead of Jack Sawyer and ahead of JT Tumalo. He went into college as a 6'5", 255-pound defensive end, and USC ruined him and had him lose 30 pounds and play linebacker where he couldn't play. Are you better off recruiting Dominic Kirks or saying to a guy like Corey Foreman, hey, we think you can still be that elite defensive end that you were. You have the traits. Where's a better investment?
I don't know. The closest parallel to that, in my mind, at least recently for Ohio State, would be going back to the Taiwan Malone recruitment. And that didn't happen and pay immediate dividends in 1 year either. Maybe that's what they expected, that it wasn't going to be you immediately go back into it. Maybe that wouldn't be the case for Foreman, or would be the case. I don't know.
Because you're taking a kid playing, moving him into another position. With Tywone Maloney, he's playing another sport. Like you do have obstacles to overcome.
I know. I'm just trying to think of a parallel to help inform the answer, because I don't know what it is. I mean,
those are the debates they have to have. Like, I don't know. Not to say that they're definitely looking at Corey Foreman. It's just a strictly hypothetical. But those are the conversations that these guys are getting paid a lot of money to sort out. And I don't know if you watch Dominic Kirk's tape. Like, I see a big, lanky, rangy defensive end prospect who you think can be good. But again, he's had injury issues, and he doesn't have the explosion you want or the dominance on tape that you want from a high school kid in Villa St. Joseph's, whatever.
Villa and Villa St. Joseph.
Yeah, that place. David Leidy's high school.
That's right.
Like, so I can understand.
They renamed it that.
I can understand the reluctance from Ohio State to go down that path. But then you look at the fact that there's, you've got 4 top 250 ranked defensive linemen in the state of Ohio, and you don't go after any of them.
Yeah, that's a fair
question.
It's not merely a Kirk's conversation for me. It's just like that guy. What change his name to whatever you want to change it to.
There's the Brian Robinson. There's Ted Hammonds who can sign with Michigan. Like there's conversations.
I just, and it's not like I'm not advocating for Ohio State taking players that they just believe won't ever play here, because I think they've done that a little too much on the offensive line, as I said the other day. But I do think maybe they can be a little more discerning in how they go about recruiting the Midwest for defensive linemen, because I think you want to, as much as you can for Ohio State, like bring in a couple of guys every cycle who aren't going to be disenchanted by not having immediate playing time and might be willing to stick around for a couple of years and develop with a guy like Larry Johnson and learn the defense. And maybe it's a 3 or 4 year proposition, but as you go through that, your room, I think, is just healthier. And then you avoid a day like today where it's like they signed 2 good defensive linemen, but you're still like, I think they need more. Like, I just think there's a way to supplement it.
Ryan Day told you, like, it's a year-to-year proposition. Like, you don't know anymore. So, like, to your point, why would you be not more willing to be like, hey, this is a 4-year guy, and he's going to develop. He's close to home. Doesn't require much in the NIL department. Like, that is the type of player that I think, we talked at length on Tuesday about the NFL feel of things now. Like, that's a scout team guy who, like, can develop into a potential player down the road. And if you believe in your ability to develop talent, then sometimes you need to take that guy.
I think the only reason that we're having this conversation, it's because there's 2 guys in that class. When you said, the approach is probably the same, the net is cast just as wide for Tim Walton and, other Tony Alford, whoever, they generally connect on those more. They're not winding up in a situation where all 5 guys that they recruit, let's just use that number out of thin air. Well, now we have too many good players. Like, that hasn't happened. Yeah. They're locking in guys, and there wasn't a lot of jeopardy, it seemed like, with Bryce West and Aaron Scott down the stretch. Like, they weren't sweating it, but they didn't probably ever feel the need to shift into a backup plan. And the Ohio State defensive line class was like, these eggs are in this basket, and everything has to happen, and there's nothing else. And just looking at it from the outside, I can see why that is frustrating.
Because those answers were known in August. That's the frustration. The Edric Houston near flip to Alabama today, notwithstanding, like, all the other guys you were chasing at that position, the Dylan Stewarts, the Marquise Lightfoots, the Booker Pickett, who Ohio State really didn't think could develop into the defensive end that they wanted, all those guys were off the board months ago. So there's been plenty of time to evaluate and find someone else. So the question is, did they explore all options and decided no one's good enough? Or did they say, we're fine with what we have? Because that, I think, is the actual crux of the argument. Like, you couldn't have known in September that there was a real chance for JT Tuimoloau and Tyreek Williams and Jack Sawyer and Michael Hall to come back.
Yep.
That being the case, like, there should have been a backfill in this class, and there isn't. Now, maybe it works out in the long run because those guys all come back and it's a moot point anyway, but, like, it is a recurring issue in that group. When, but
Eric Mensah kind of was that, right?
He signed in, he committed in September, but he was offered in August.
Yeah.
And that was because they wanted another defensive tackle, thinking that they were going to lose Tyreek Williams and Michael Hall. So, if they didn't move on him, then what do you got?
Yeah.
But you look at running back, Tony Alford makes the decision in April to pick Jordan Lyle, knowing full well what happened with Mark Fletcher a year ago. Mm-hmm. and then runs into the same problem. Now, he was fortunate that he had Sam Williams-Dixon close to home and James Peoples also in the class. And so maybe the third guy was a luxury all along, but there was no other option there either. So, and that's a guy who in the last 4 years has had a pretty hit and miss time on the recruiting trail.
Yeah.
His philosophy is very similar to Larry Johnson's. It's all about that personal relationship. You are now my son, and I am going to be your father figure. And in a world where that means less and less, like it is hard to see those guys adjusting fast enough.
I thought they did do a good job at some positions of having secondary options. I guess that's probably not the right way to describe them, but like getting Leroy Roker at safety, contingency play, like getting Leroy Roker at safety, I thought was like a really nice pivot because he's an under the radar guy, but like is oozing with athletic traits that I think get you really excited. And he like gave Van Sickle, I think long term, my opinion, will end up being like an upgrade over Mark Nave if you consider him the replacement for Nave in that class. So it's not like
it's not even long term; it's short term.
Short term, he's a better prospect too. Yeah. So it's not like I think maybe like the last couple of cycles there were multiple positions where we thought like, man, they put all their eggs in one basket, didn't hit on them, and then they were kind of screwed. That maybe did happen a little bit on the defensive line this year, but I think some other spots where that could have happened, they did a nice job of covering themselves.
Yeah, I mean, you look at linebacker, you signed two that you really, really love in Garrett Stover and Peyton Pierce. You swung all the way through for Kingston Viamawasa. He called the Ohio State staff on Tuesday night and said, I love you, but I'm sticking with Notre Dame.
We'll see you next year.
See you next year.
And you know, that sucks. But Ohio State also went out of their way in September to bring in Nigel Glover to alleviate that because, again, they knew.
In response, yeah.
That was a response to Kingston Viamawasa not picking Ohio State in the summer. So, like, you see the willingness to pivot in other spots. And sometimes I think there's still a few guys on the staff who are a little stubborn in their way. And when Ryan Day is asked to evaluate how do you judge your staff, and he talks recruiting first, it's hard not to notice that there's like 40% of the staff that doesn't recruit. That's a you know, that all that to say, like, you're still finishing with the top 3 class in the country. So like, imagine how much better it can be if that focus is directed in the right spot.
I think that's been my primary point for the entire month of December is maximizing opportunities that are in front of you. They can be in any nature of the program, but Ohio State should not have parts of their staff that you have to question at all. We'll get into more of that on Thursday on the Podcast Daily. Berm is also going to get a lot deeper into the weeds on what this recruiting class looks like with some talking stuff later on.
It'll be live. We're thinking like 8 o'clock. I got to drive back home.
Live version of Talking Stuff, so you can look forward to that. There'll be even more recruiting talk that's coming later on the podcast. But as we wrap up Snap Judgments, brought to you by Buyers Auto, I'll start with you, Bill, because I know Berm will have probably way more to say about it.
Yeah.
This signing class and the way that the beginning of the early signing period began for Ohio State means what for Ryan Day, for NIL. When we were in here on this day last year, the entire second half of the show was money, money, money.
Yeah.
Philosophy, approach, aggressiveness. What does it say to you the way it worked out today?
I think they're in a better spot with everything now than they were a year ago, right? I don't think there was an NIL question asked of Ryan Day, and I didn't really feel. I mean, Berm was asking sort of generally about like the direction this is all going, which is a worthwhile question, but like specifically, like, do you have enough money? Which is like some of the questions that were asked last year. Was not asked this year, and certainly you can always have more. I don't know that you'll ever have enough, but I think Ohio State is certainly more competitive in that space, and they need it to be. And I think generally they did a nice job of addressing some needs with this class. So I don't know. I would feel pretty good about it. We have to wait and see. There's a lot of dominoes to fall here with exactly what this roster is going to look like. And one of the last things Ryan Day said was the goal is to have the best roster in the country by August. And there's a lot of different avenues for Ohio State to get there, including guys who are already on the roster sticking around. It's not merely the recruiting class, but I think in terms of doing their part with the high school recruits in the effort toward getting the best roster in the country for next fall, I think they did a pretty good job. Like, did they bat 1,000? No. Does anybody? No, not really. But it certainly could have been far worse, I think, with some of the way things were trending as we walked into the room to talk with Ryan Day. And I think we came out of that room feeling a little better about things.
It's hard to grade a top 3 class anything other than an A.
Yeah.
But because the standard is so high at Ohio State, people are going to find ways to say, hey, maybe this could have been better. Maybe it could have improved here. The advancement in NIL from a year ago to now is huge, but the Buckeyes are not in that conversation on a recruit-by-recruit basis that Oregon is, and that's probably never going to happen, right? I mean, like, you have to be fair about it. Like, Nike has unlimited money, and so unless you find people who are Phil Knight-esque for that, grow up and want to root for Ohio State and have shoes that are Ohio State colors and all the things that Phil Knight does when he shows up at Oregon's campus, and is like, hey, do you want to be on a Nike?
I don't think that
Was that on? Was that on
Do you want to be on a
purpose?
Nike commercial?
Did you script that?
Those are things that, like,
I do have a question about it. I don't want to derail the conversation, but like Ohio State's a Nike school.
Yeah.
Ohio State athletes have Nike contracts.
Phil Knight is very much invested in Ohio State. I don't truly buy that.
He makes money off Ohio State. He spends money on Oregon.
They spend a pretty big amount keeping Ohio State happy. Now, he's not
showing up on Ohio State's campus and saying, you know what, you should come to this school.
I understand that point. But I don't think the Ohio State versus Oregon argument, and I know that and I'm saying that after they just lost a head-to-head battle, I don't think that that's as big of an issue for Ohio State specifically over the long haul that Phil Knight is at Oregon. I don't.
Plus, he's like 90. So
yeah, I mean, he's going to die eventually. But
Maybe.
someone else will rise in his place.
He's probably got a clone.
He's got a
enough money.
hologram.
But, Ohio State wants to be elite, and that will happen. And it's frustrating to people because it takes a little longer than you'd want it to at a place like this. But I know people will be mad when I say it. Like, Ryan Day wants to win football games. Like, the idea that he is in some way, like, not personally motivated enough is wrong. He wants to win games. He wants to be elite. And the Buckeyes will find a way to do it. Now, they would love to have some help from the NCAA creating some rules, or the Congress creating a rule to make things easier. But if that doesn't happen, like what we saw in the last 18 hours is a very good sign for what Ohio State's willing to do in the future.
Yep. You could see a couple opportunities there for Ryan Day to take some deep breaths and compose himself. Ohio State got through it, not perfectly, but pretty close to it as they start the early signing period. National Signing Day press conference and all of that, a wrap for the Buckeyes. Appreciate you joining us for some Snap Judgments. They are brought to you by Buyers Auto. That's Bill Landis, Jeremy Birmingham. I'm Austin Ward. We'll talk to you later.